"Who's the woman behind this voice?" the ex-con asked, and the whole town went silent. A simple question, at least on the surface. But in Silver Mesa in 1956, it landed like a crack of thunder across a sleeping desert. The man who asked it, Jack Monroe, had been out of prison for only 2 weeks, and the town had already made up its mind about him. People stepped aside when he walked down the street. They stopped talking when he stood in line for coffee. When he opened the door of the general store, everyone suddenly found something very interesting on their own shoes. To them, Jack was the past made flesh. Violence, mistakes, a bar fight that ended with a man dead, and 12 years behind the walls of the state penitentiary. But to Jack, none of that was as frightening as the single question he had carried in his chest for over a decade. Who was the woman behind the switchboard voice? In prison, inmates were allowed 1 phone call a week. 3 minutes. 3 minutes that could not fix loneliness, could not undo the wreckage of a life, could not give a man back the youth he had lost to concrete and steel. But those same 3 minutes were enough to keep Jack from believing the world had erased him completely. And every week, without fail, it was the same voice on the other end. "Silver Mesa operator speaking. Who would you like me to connect you to?" That voice, steady, warm, almost too gentle for men calling from locked rooms, became something Jack anchored himself to. A small, steady place to hold on to while everything else in his world slipped. Jack left prison on a cold morning, under a sky clear as glass. He was thinner than he used to be, hair gray at the temples, shoulders still broad, but carrying the stiffness of someone who had spent too long being watched. He owned little more than a small canvas bag, an old pair of gloves, and the memory of that voice that had reached him through 12 long years. He didn't hope for much, just a chance to start over, find a job, live quietly, not trouble anyone. Silver Mesa was still a dusty little desert town then. A church, a general store, 1 gas station, a string of humble houses, and behind the general store, tucked inside a small room lined with wires and dust, sat the switchboard where Lila Hart spent her days plugging lines and clearing static. Jack did not know her name yet, but he knew the sound of her voice better than he knew his own reflection. On the day he came back, people watched him with that heavy silence small towns keep for men with ugly histories. Nobody said a harsh word. Nobody said a kind one either. Except for a couple of old-timers who remembered him from before the mistake, the whole town held its breath around him. Jack didn't blame them. He had earned the weight of their caution, and he intended to spend the rest of his life paying off what he'd taken. He got a job with the regional telephone company, repairing lines, climbing poles, replacing broken parts. A job that didn't require charm or conversation, only steady hands, good balance, and a willingness to work high above the ground. The manager had hired him on the spot. "We just need someone who can climb, do the work, and no one here cares who you used to be." One afternoon, Jack stepped into the old coffee shop, formerly the saloon where everything had gone wrong, and took a seat in the corner. He kept his head down, hoping to blend into the shadows. But he heard someone at the counter mention the operator girl and Lila, and how she'd worked that switchboard for more than 20 years without anyone really knowing what she looked like. Jack's head came up at once. Someone asked, "Has anyone ever actually seen her in person?" A few shook their heads. One old rancher shrugged. "She's just the voice behind the curtain." Jack finished his water, set the glass down, and asked the question the entire town would repeat for weeks afterward. "Who's the woman behind this voice?" The table went quiet, then the entire shop. People stared at Jack as if he had tugged at something sacred. Because in Silver Mesa, everyone knew that voice, but no one ever asked who she was, or what kind of life she had, or whether she was lonely. And the fact that an ex-con said it with a depth that felt like a bruise pressed too long, froze every tongue. A man finally whispered, "Why do you ask?" Jack answered plainly, "Because I owe her more than I can explain." Another murmured, "Her voice helped you in there?" Jack nodded. When things were at their hardest, that voice reminded me I was still human. No one teased him. No one laughed. Even the ones who had mocked him earlier fell silent, because the way he said it told them everything. Jack Monroe wasn't looking for romance. He wasn't chasing a woman. He was looking for the last piece of himself he hadn't lost. That night, in his small rented room overlooking the old train tracks, Jack lay awake. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the same line echoing back through the years. Silver Mesa operator speaking. "Who would you like me to connect you to?" Warm, gentle. Human in a way life had not been to him. A few days later, the chance came unexpectedly. His manager said, "We got a faulty line behind the general store. Go fix the switchboard. The operator's waiting." That's how Jack Monroe found himself standing in front of the old wooden door, hand hovering over the knob, heart beating hard enough to bruise his ribs. One last thought flashed through his mind. Would the woman behind that voice even want to hear the voice of a man who'd spent 12 years behind bars? But he opened the door anyway. And from that moment, Jack Monroe's world began to change. The switchboard door opened, and Jack Monroe stood still for a few seconds, as if the warmth inside the little room had stunned him. He had always imagined a switchboard room as something cold and mechanical, full of wires and clicking gears. But this was different. Lila Hart's room felt alive. A soft yellow lamp glowed on her desk, a cup of tea still steaming beside it, a few dried flowers tucked behind an old picture frame, and rows of slender wires running like quiet thoughts from one end of Silver Mesa to the other. Then he saw her. Lila Hart looked nothing like the woman Jack had pictured during his 12 years in prison. Not young, not old, not striking, but with something in her face that made a man look twice. Brown hair pulled back at the nape, a few loose strands brushing her cheek. A simple white blouse with the sleeves rolled up, revealing small calluses from years of work. Her eyes were a deep, steady brown, not sad but tired, as though she had lived too long in the silence of other people's conversations. She looked up at Jack. One glance, and he felt as if she could see right through the years he wanted to forget. "What do you need?" Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Low, warm, gentle. The same voice he had heard almost every week, even if he had not known it was hers. Jack swallowed. "I'm here to fix the lines." He lifted his toolbox as if to prove he truly was there for work. Lila nodded and pointed to the corner. "Line 3 keeps humming. Line 7 is clicking. Go ahead." She spoke politely but without softness, not because she was cold, but because she had learned to keep herself separate from a town that noticed her voice more than her life. Jack climbed onto the chair and began checking the wires, but he couldn't help watching the way she worked, the way her fingers moved quickly from plug to plug, the way she scribbled notes without hesitation. Every time a call came in, she delivered the same practiced line. "Silver Mesa operator speaking. Who would you like me to connect you to?" Hearing it in person, not through a prison receiver, made him freeze. "Something wrong?" she asked without looking up. Jack blinked. "No, you sound very professional." She gave a small shrug. "I've said the same line for 15 years. It becomes a habit." Jack fell quiet. He didn't say that her voice had once held him together on nights he thought he might break. When the repair was finished, he flipped the switch. The board clicked cleanly, no static. "All set," he said. Lila stepped over to check. For a moment, they stood close enough for Jack to catch the faint scent of mint tea on her clothes. A clean, soft smell he hadn't known for years. Nothing like rusted metal and prison dust. She lifted her gaze to his, not sharp, not wary, simply steady, as though she had spent years observing people through the tone of their words. "You're Jack Monroe, aren't you?" Jack stiffened. "You know me?" In Silver Mesa, everyone knows when someone comes back. "You're not worried about me?" His voice dropped low. Lila studied him for a moment before answering. "If you're here to work, I'm not worried. If you're here to cause trouble, I'll be the first to know. Everyone who causes trouble has to use a phone eventually." There was a small, unexpected hint of humor in her voice. Jack let out a short laugh, a real one. It surprised even him. Lila returned to her chair and plugged in another call. "Where are you staying?" she asked without looking up. "Boarding house by the tracks. Next to the little greenhouse?" "You know that too?" "I hear more than you think." Jack watched her for a long moment. She wasn't the kind of woman men stared at in the street, but there was something about her, the quiet strength in her hands, the way she bit the end of her pencil, the calm weight in her voice, that made Jack understand why he survived the years he had. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 15 years. I started back when we used hand-crank switchboards. Things are easier now, but they still need someone to connect the lines." "You don't get lonely, sitting in here all day?" Lila paused, her hands, eyes fixed on the board. "I do get lonely," she said softly. "But if I weren't here, people wouldn't reach each other. So at least, I'm useful." Jack understood that feeling better than anyone. A man who has spent years in prison knows exactly what it is to live without being needed. He leaned against the edge of her desk, voice dropping to something gentler. "During my time inside, the voice on the Silver Mesa line was the only thing that made me feel human." Lila looked up quickly. "You called here often?" "Every week." "And it was always me who answered?" "I think so." "But you didn't know who I was?" Jack shook his head. "All I knew was that your voice didn't make me feel like a number." Silence filled the room, softer than before. Lila lowered her eyes to her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then I suppose I've spoken to you more than any woman has in your whole life." Jack let out a faint, self-aware laugh. "Probably so." Color rose to Lila's cheeks. She turned back to the board, pretending to busy herself with wires she had already sorted. But something inside her shifted. When Jack gathered his tools and walked to the door, he paused. "Miss Hart." "You can call me Lila." Jack nodded slowly, something like gratitude flickering across his face. "Lila, if it's all right with you, I can come back whenever the lines need work." She kept her eyes on the switchboard. "As long as you don't mind the noise. Every wire in this room carries someone's voice." Jack answered quietly. "Voices aren't as frightening as silence." Lila froze. That sentence reached a place in her that few had ever noticed. When the door closed behind him, the room returned to its ordinary sounds, the clicks, the hum of the wires. But for the first time in years, Lila Hart felt that the switchboard room wasn't quite as empty. Someone had come in today, not just to fix a wire. Someone had heard her voice, In the days after their first meeting in the switchboard room, Jack kept working his repair routes across Silver Mesa. It did not matter whether he was climbing a pole on the north end or checking wires near the tracks. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he always heard the soft click of the switchboard and Lila's warm voice echoing like a memory that did not fade. For Lila, the long afternoons of ringing phones and housewives asking to be connected to their husbands suddenly felt different. She never admitted it, but every time she heard the front door of the general store open, her heart skipped for half a second. Most of the time, it was only someone buying flour or picking up mail. But hope has a quiet way of returning before a person even notices. One pale gold afternoon, the calls came in non-stop. A family on the outskirts of town was trying to reach the hospital, but the line kept cutting out. Lila tried 3 times, and each time the signal died. She frowned and glanced instinctively toward the door just as Jack walked in, his sleeves dusty from the desert wind. "East line is down," he said. All he needed was one crackling sound from the board to know. "I'll fix it now." He grabbed the ladder and ran toward the pole without waiting for instructions. Lila stood at the switchboard, listening to the hammering above the wind and Jack calling down, "Try it now!" She plugged the line again, and the signal returned strong and clear. The family reached the hospital. The call lasted only a few minutes, but Lila heard the mother's breath shake with relief and a whispered thank God that no one else caught. When Jack stepped back inside, shirt coated in desert dust, Lila looked at him differently. "You came at the perfect moment," she said. Jack wiped his forehead, slightly embarrassed. "I was just nearby." Lila gave a small, warm smile. "No. Some people arrive at the right moment because they should." The words stopped Jack for a beat, as if they touched a place he had kept locked up for 12 years. From that day forward, something invisible ran between them. Not a wire in the switchboard, but a quiet line that grew stronger with every shared moment. Whenever the board made a faint static noise, Jack somehow knew the switchboard room needed him. Lila never called him directly, but whenever the door opened and he appeared, a soft light came into her eyes that she herself did not notice. One late evening, Jack was working on the back wires when he heard Lila's voice tremble slightly through the open window. Silver Mesa operator speaking. "I hear you clearly. Please do not worry. I will connect you right away." Her tone was gentle yet strained. It was a call from an elderly man sitting alone in a phone booth outside town, trying to reach his daughter in Albuquerque to apologize for something he had carried for years. Lila guided him through every broken sentence, kept the line alive, and held the silence steady whenever his voice faltered. When the call ended, Lila exhaled softly. Jack stood outside the window, watching her rest her head against the chair for a moment, pressing her fingers to her brow. No one in town paid attention to her like that. No one saw how much she carried on her small shoulders. But Jack did. When Lila noticed him, she startled. "You heard all that?" Jack shook his head. "I heard enough to know. You are kinder than this town ever realized." Lila lowered her gaze. "People see me as part of the switchboard, a box of wires. They do not think I have a life outside these clicks." Jack spoke quietly. "I think differently." The simplicity of those words made Lila look up. No one praised her. No one noticed her. But the man standing in front of her, the one the whole town watched with caution, had just said something no one had ever told her. In that dim little room, Jack understood something true. If anyone in this town knew loneliness as deeply as he did, it was the woman standing here. And Lila realized that for the first time in 15 years of connecting other people's lives, someone finally saw her. Not her voice, not her job, her. From that night on, the phone calls in Silver Mesa were never quite the same again. That night, Silver Mesa was as dark as the bottom of a well. Not a single star in the sky. Folks who had lived in the desert long enough knew what that meant. When the heavens turned that quiet, the wind was gathering itself out there in the open flats, ready to slam into town like a restless beast. Lila was on the night shift, the shift no one else wanted. Nights in the switchboard room were lonely, unpredictable, and sometimes the crack of a wind-snapped line could rattle even the steadiest heart. But she was used to it. She brought her mug of mint tea, turned on her little radio, and settled behind the switchboard the way she had for years. Around 11, the wind began to rise. Dust rolled through the streets like smoke. The front door of the general store shook hard, as if someone were pounding on it. The lamp in the switchboard room flickered. Lila glanced at the board and saw a few of the lights dancing in a way she did not like. "No quiet nights in Silver Mesa," she murmured, standing to check the wires. Suddenly, the door blew open. A tall figure stood there in the storm, covered in wind and red dust. Jack. Hat pulled low, coat coated in grit, breathing hard. "You all right?" he asked, voice half lost in the wind. Lila startled, but did not panic. "I am fine. What are you doing out there? The wind could knock a horse over." Jack shut the door and brushed off his coat. "I know. That is why I checked the lines behind the store. The main feed may snap any minute." As if agreeing with him, the switchboard burst into blinking lights. A call came through, the signal weak, fading in and out. Lila sat quickly. "Silver Mesa operator, I hear you. Please repeat that. The line is unstable." A man's voice came through in broken pieces, swallowed by the storm. "Lila, is that you? I need the hospital in Albuquerque? My wife, she cannot breathe." It was Mr. Johnson. Everyone in town knew him and his wife Evelyn, married more than 40 years, rarely apart. His voice shook so badly Lila gripped her headset tight. "Mr. Johnson, I hear you. I am connecting the call now. Hold on for me." She plugged the wire. The light blinked, then died. Signal gone. "It will not hold," she whispered. Jack stepped beside her. "The east line is almost down. I can climb the pole again." Lila snapped her head toward him. "Jack, no. Not in this wind. Can you make the connection if the signal comes back? If the line stabilizes, yes. But right now, it is barely alive." Jack looked at her. His eyes were steady, honest. "If I do not climb, that call will die, and he will lose his last chance to speak to her." The weight of that sentence hit Lila like a stone. She looked at him, really looked at him. This was the same man who once stood alone in a prison phone booth with 3 minutes of hope each week. Now he was ready to climb a shaking pole in a sandstorm so another man could say goodbye. "You are certain?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded. "If I do not do this, I will never forgive myself. Not again." Lila understood exactly what "not again" meant. Regret. A past that had cost him more than years. She opened the supply cabinet and pulled out the safety strap. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "You come back. Do you hear me, Jack Monroe?" He held her gaze. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something neither one dared name. "I will come back." He stepped into the storm. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the switchboard room darker, colder, and far too large. Lila listened to the wind batter the building, to the clatter of the ladder, to the wire singing under the force of the gale. Her heart pounded like a hammer. A loud crack split the air. "Jack!" she cried, nearly running to the door. His voice answered, strained but clear. "I am all right. Try the line, Lila. Now." She rushed back, plugged in the connection. The light flickered, then held. "Mr. Johnson, I have your call connected. Speak now." Lila heard him breathe out a broken cry. Then she heard a woman's weak voice from the hospital side. Husband and wife spoke to each other through wind and wire. They apologized, thanked one another, said all the words couples save for when time is running out. The desert screamed outside, but inside that little room, those voices were all that mattered. When the call finally ended, Lila lowered her headset with hands that would not stay steady. She ran outside before her mind could stop her. Jack was standing at the base of the pole, covered in dust, hair wild, a few scratches bleeding on his knuckles where the metal hooks had cut him. But he was standing. Lila stopped in front of him, breath shaking. "Jack, you are out of your mind." He gave a tired smile. "A little madness is worth it if it gives someone a chance they will never get again." She stared at him for a long moment, the wind swirling around them like a living thing. "You did something no one else in this town would have done. You know that, right?" Jack lowered his voice. "Sometimes it only takes one person caring to hold two lives together." She did not know if he was talking about the Johnsons or talking about the two of them. But that night, under the storm-filled sky, Lila Hart saw Jack Monroe with new eyes. Not as the man who had been to prison, not as the man people whispered about, as the man who climbed into the storm so someone else would not face the darkness alone. And she realized that not every man with a broken past is dangerous. Some are simply waiting for one chance to be human again. And she had just given him that chance. The next morning, Silver Mesa felt different. Word had already spread that Jack Monroe climbed a telephone pole in the middle of a desert storm so Mr. Johnson could speak to his wife one last time. News in a small town travels faster than the wind, and by sunrise people were looking at Jack with a new kind of quiet respect. Men who had avoided his eyes the week before nodded at him in passing. Someone outside the cafe murmured, "Not many folks would have done that." Jack only dipped his head. He did not want praise. He had not done it for glory. He did it because he knew what it felt like to live with the words, "I should have done more," echoing in his chest. That feeling had followed him for 12 long years. Lila went back to the switchboard room the way she always did, but nothing felt the same. Every time she sat down and heard the familiar clicks of the lines, she also heard Jack's voice shouting through the storm, "Connect the call, Lila." She had never heard anyone call her name like that before, with trust in it, with urgency, with the belief that she mattered. She was used to being the quiet voice behind other people's conversations, not the center of someone's hope. That afternoon, Jack stopped by to check the lines. When he stepped inside, Lila looked up, and for a brief moment, there was a peacefulness between them that neither spoke aloud. It was not young love. It was not something rushed or bright. It was the gentle recognition between two people who had walked too far in loneliness and finally found someone keeping pace beside them. "Are you all right?" Lila asked, glancing at the scrapes on his hands. "I am fine," Jack replied. "I have seen worse nights than last night." "But no one climbs a pole in a storm for a phone call," she said softly. Jack gave a faint smile. "Lila, for 12 years I heard your voice every week. I did not know your name. I did not know your face. But somehow that voice kept my feet on the ground. Lila's breath caught. She set her notebook down and looked at him, unsure what to do with the warmth rising behind her ribs. Jack, I was only doing my job. No, he said quietly. In a prison, a kind voice is as rare as rain. You saved more than one call. You saved the little part of me that still believed I mattered. Lila lowered her eyes to her hands. Those hands had connected thousands of calls for other people, yet they had never held anything truly meant for her. She spoke softly. And now? Do you still hear my voice the way you did before? Jack stepped one pace closer. No, he said. Now I hear it the way a free man hears it. A warm, steady silence settled between them. No promises, no declarations, just understanding. Something had changed, not in the loud way life sometimes shifts, but in the quiet way a heart starts beating differently once it finds something worth beating for. And in that little switchboard room, both of them finally acknowledged what had already begun. A line between two lives, drawn not by wires or signals, but by truth. A week after the desert storm, Silver Mesa slipped back into its usual quiet rhythm. The dust drifted across the main road. The air settled low and warm, and the town looked exactly the way it always had. But for Jack and Lila, nothing felt the same. Nothing rushed, nothing dramatic. Just something growing slowly between them, like the faint warmth from the peppermint tea Lila kept on her windowsill, steady and gentle like the lines Jack repaired every day. That afternoon, Jack came to the switchboard room after his shift. He did not bring his ladder or tools. He only brought the silence he had carried with him all day. Lila looked up, surprised to see him at an hour when nothing was broken. Another line acting up? She asked, offering him an easy way in. Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, then shook his head. No, I did not come to fix anything today. Lila set her pencil down. Her eyes softened a little. Then why are you here? Jack stepped farther into the room. The last of the late afternoon light touched his face, making him look strong and unsure at the same time, like a man not used to choosing what he wants. I came to say something I should have said 12 years ago, he said. Lila stayed still, her hands resting on the desk. She did not smile. She did not look away. She waited. Jack drew in a deep breath, gathering whatever courage he had left. In prison, I had only 3 minutes each week to make a call, but I had something else. I had your voice. Lila's heart tightened, but she stayed quiet to let him finish. You did not know who I was, Jack continued. You were just connecting calls, but your voice made me feel like I had not been completely left behind. You did not know it, but there were nights I held on because I knew I would hear that voice on Sunday morning. Lila's fingers curled gently on the edge of the switchboard. Jack, let me finish, he said with a small smile. The first time I saw you in person, not through a telephone line, I understood something. It was not because your voice sounded the same. It was because when you looked at me, there was no fear, no pity. You looked at me like I was a man, not a mistake. The words fell into the quiet room like something long overdue. Jack stepped closer, then closer again, until only a small space stood between them. His voice was low but steady. Lila, I do not know how many years I have left, and I do not expect anything from you. But whatever years remain, I want to spend them saying the things I kept locked inside for too long. Lila swallowed. Are you saying what I think you are saying? Jack nodded. I'm saying I want to start again. Not because I am lonely, not because I owe you anything, but because I like being near you. I like hearing you speak. I like seeing you in this little room. And if you will let me, I want to be the first person who calls just to ask how you are doing, even when you do not need to connect me anywhere. Lila laughed softly, a sound she had not made in many years. Jack Monroe. Do you know no one has ever called this switchboard just for me? I know. And you want to be the first? If you will let me. Lila rose from her chair. She was not the type to blush or fidget, but something warm moved through her eyes, slow and gentle. She stepped closer and said quietly, Jack, I heard your voice for years before I ever knew your face. And now that I know the man behind that voice, I think I would like to begin again too. Jack looked at her as if she had just handed him something he thought he would never have. He did not reach for her. He did not rush. He simply whispered, Thank you, Lila. She shook her head softly. No, thank you for seeing me, not as the switchboard, as a woman. Outside, the late afternoon sun rested on the telephone pole Jack had repaired the week before. The desert was calm again. The lights in the switchboard room glowed steady and warm. Lila turned back to her desk and plugged in a test line. You know, Jack, she said, lifting the receiver, we could start with something simple. What is that? He asked. She held the receiver to her ear and looked right at him. Silver Mesa operator speaking. Jack Monroe. Where would you like me to connect you today? Jack stepped closer, placed his hand on the desk, and leaned in slightly. Today I do not want to be connected anywhere, he answered. He held her gaze. Today, I am calling for you. Lila smiled, and the soft click of the switchboard echoed through the room. Not to connect two telephone lines, but to mark the moment when two lives that had wandered for too long finally found their way home in Silver Mesa. If you are still here, listening to the last moments of this story, then I believe your heart felt what Silver Mesa was trying to tell us. Sometimes a life that seems late, sometimes a heart that feels worn out, can still find someone willing to listen. All it takes is a small chance. Jack and Lila did not begin with promises or fireworks. Their story did not rush. It grew from a voice, from a quiet room, and from the kind of gentleness both of them had been missing for far too long. And perhaps that is the kind of love we remember the most. If this story brought you a soft smile or reminded you of a call from years ago, I invite you to subscribe and join us for more warm Western stories. Stories that are not loud, not hurried, just gentle enough to make the evenings feel a little less lonely. Thank you for staying until the end. I wish you a peaceful night. And who knows? Maybe tomorrow someone will call just to ask, "How are you doing today?"